Let's create this simple 2D walk cycle in Blender Grease Pencil together. You only need 2 main poses for this walk cycle and 2 in-betweens. It's fairly simple and straightforward to do. In this step-by-step guide, we're gonna have a look first at the rough animation of the walk cycle on the spot. We're gonna have a look at cleanup and coloring, and then we take the walk cycle that we did on the step and move it across the scene with a simple modifier trick that I will show you as well. So there's a bit of everything in it. I think it gets you from start to finish of an animation quite nicely, no matter if you do a walk cycle or whatever your heart's desire is. Also in the left corner you will see in blue my shortcuts I'm using, but keep in mind I'm using a German keyboard, and Control Z that you usually have on an English keyboard is Control Y for me. Also I've improved the shortcuts a little bit, so sometimes you see me using Q, S or E. Q is for the drawing mode, S is for sculpting, and E is for edit. And then I use Tab for the pie menu. If you want to use at least the pie menu, have a look at my 10 hidden keyboard shortcuts for Blender Grease Pencil and you'll learn all about how to use that. Also later on you see me using A and D to flip between different keyframes. To set this up easily yourself, go into Preferences, Keyboard Shortcuts, and then search for Jump to Key. Put in your desired shortcuts to do the jump between those. With all of this out of the way, let's finally jump into the animation. First, we need to set up a new file. Check that it's on 24 or 25 frames. I usually use 24, but whatever you're comfortable with. To draw, with my grease pencil selected, I go into draw mode. I usually go with a fairly standard Blender grease pencil brush that has nothing special about, and with this brush selected I have a simple black line material as well. So here you see the settings for mine. You can copy those over if you want. Then we can start drawing in our design. First we need the horizontal line in the bottom where our character can stand on. I use the guides up here to help me click them on and off, and you can draw in perfectly horizontal. Then to draw in your design, I bring in my old design that I had to reference it a little bit. Let's draw the character in a pose where both feet are hitting the ground like this. And we call this first pose the connect pose. Let's draw this in and tweak our design. It can be still a bit rough, we clean it up later. Okay, that will do it for now. For the second pose, we need to first activate the onion skinning for the layer. So make sure that the layer on the bottom left has the onion skinning selected, and also that the material that you're using has onion skinning turned on. Then in our layers tab we can scroll down a little bit and you'll find the onion skinning settings. I like to turn them very low because then I can better see and judge my animation. With this out of the way, let's get to the second pose. We open up our timeline, select our first keyframe, press Shift D to duplicate it and move it along. To save ourselves a lot of time for this animation, we're not gonna redraw the upper body but only the feet. The second pose, we're gonna select now in edit mode all the strokes and push everything a little bit upwards, just a little bit. And to be more precise with this, just press G and Shift, and then you can make much more precise adjustments. When you're happy with this, in edit mode select the legs, and with X you delete the legs. We're gonna draw them in new. Now you just draw in the new legs where one foot is still on the ground and the other one is just passing it. Make it just in the middle. This pose is called the up pose because the figure is just slightly higher than usual for the other leg to be able to pass next to the standing leg. These were the two main poses that you need, and now you only need to do some in-betweening. Again, in the timeline, select the first keyframe and with Shift D duplicate it over between keyframe 1 and 2. Then in edit mode, pressing G and Shift, you move them up slightly, so it's just in between those drawings that you did before, and you delete the legs and draw the legs in between the first and the second frame. It's important here that the foot that's on the ground is perfectly in the middle between frame 1 and 2. Because otherwise later on when it's walking over the screen and it's not regular, it will look weird because suddenly the feet is a bit faster or a bit slower, so you get like a bump in the walk cycle. And you do the same now for the second in between. And here you move it slightly down, so it is going down again from that up pose. Again, delete the feet and put them perfectly centered between the first feet. Now let's adjust the timing. Make sure that you have a keyframe on every 3 frames. And that is a bit tricky to find out, but make sure it's on every 3rd frame. Now you have the first step of your 2-step walk cycle. For that, you just select the first 4 keyframes and copy them over for your step. And then adjust the length of your scene to be 24 frames only. Press enter to play and hooray, that should be the first rough for your 2D animated walk cycle on 3s. Let's dive into the cleanup. For that, just create a new layer called Cleanup in the Layers tab and reduce the existing rough animation layer to maybe 20%. Now we can start drawing in your clean lines here. Just take your time with it, don't worry about closing all the gaps yet. I find that actually having some gaps here and there makes for a nicer design. You can also use the sculpt tool at this stage. First, you should lock your rough animation layer though, so you only manipulate the clean lines. I love to use the pull or push brush, both are fine, and with pressing F you can adjust the size of the brush and then move your strokes around. Also at this stage you can bring in whatever text or logo you want to put on top of the cardboard box. To bring in any reference material, go into object mode, press Shift A, then select image reference here, choose location wherever that is on your hard drive, import it in your stage, and with any other object in Blender you can just freely move it around with pressing G, S or R to move, rotate or scale, and then trace it on your existing cleanup layer. Once you're done with that, you can manipulate it in the edit mode and rotate, scale it to your desired position on your card box. And now you should have your first clean keyframe done. And you maybe guessed it, the same as we did with the rough animation, we can now simply duplicate the frames, move them slightly up and down depending on the position, and then erase the legs and draw in our clean legs. After I drew in my second step here, I noticed that I should maybe make one foot a bit bigger, that's in the front, and the other one a bit smaller, that's in the back, and also adjust the height so the foot in the front is a bit lower than the other, so you can really feel the depth of the 2 feet next to each other. You can do that here or leave them just being on the spot, either or is fine. And now you just have to do your in-betweens as you did before with the rough. So again, copy the first frame over to the in-between, adjusting the height in edit mode, deleting the legs and draw in some new ones that are perfectly in the center. And now you should have your first 4 keyframes for the first step. For the second step, again, we just copy over the first 4 frames, and while the position of the height of the walk cycle for the second step is the same, the feet are not. You need to flip the foot that's in the front with the other one being in the back. So it's a bit of a weird task and you can get a little bit brain dead with this one, but just try to do one step at a time, simply deleting the leg and drawing in the new one with the feet being swapped in position. At this stage, it really helps as well to flip between your keys with pressing A and D so you see where the feet are going. Also, it's really handy to use the sculpt tool here again to slightly adjust different keyframe strokes. The only thing that was left to do was to do some secondary animation. I used the sculpt tool to push and sculpt a little bit the jacket and the little cloth that is hanging out of the toolbox. Just suggesting a little wave in the movement of these textures, so they're not completely stiff as the other materials. I'm quite happy with this now, so let's get into the next step, which is coloring. And for coloring, I have 2 methods prepared for you, which both have their benefits. Let me show you and you choose for yourself. This first method of coloring is quite good to find your colors initially. First things first, create a new layer called coloring that is underneath your clean layer. And for the coloring of this process, we actually need a fill material. It's very likely that there already is one. If not, go into the material tabs and create a new one, pressing here, select fill material and deselect the stroke. Then you should have a fill material, call it coloring or fill, whatever you like. And then in draw mode, select now the fill material that you set up. Next to that, change from the material coloring to the vertex color mode. Now you can simply select your color, and when you draw, you actually have sort of like a lasso fill, which is quite nice to initially find your colors and so. So pick whatever colors you like for the different objects and just color them in. Once you have your first pose and you're happy with that, again we can use the same method as we did with the rough and the clean to just simply copying over our frame to our second pose, moving them up into position, just deleting the leg coloring and drawing the data in the right position in again. Also, if in some positions your coloring is slightly off, just use the sculpt tool to move it in the right position, but don't forget to lock the clean layer first. You can color pick a color from before or anywhere in the scene by hovering with your mouse on top of the color wheel and pressing E. Now the color picker is selected and you can select from anywhere in the scene. Notice though that most likely your color that you choose and you draw in again is slightly different. Go into the color settings of the preferences, make sure you have sRGB and medium contrast selected, and then go into this yellow preference tab. And in here you have to deselect using the light scenes in the scene. Trying the color picker now, it should work perfectly. Just a weird little detour, I hope it works out for you. This first method of coloring is very effective if you have animation that stays more or less the same and you can reuse a lot of the keyframes before. And if that's not the case, I have a second method with fill tool for you. But we have to prepare the scene a little bit to use the second method. First of all, we need blank new keyframes on the coloring layer for every frame that you want to color. Just put the timeline in the right position and press I, hovering over it, and then select Insert Blank Keyframe. Do that 3-4 times for however keyframes you want to create. In the second preparation step, we need to close all the gaps that exist in our line drawing. And for that, there is a handy tool. It lets us create these boundary strokes that we can later on get rid and that don't render as well. For that, while you're in the fill bucket, press Ctrl Shift and it lets you create this line. If it doesn't work, which is very likely, go into the preferences again, search for grease pencil, scroll down the list of all the grease pencil options until you find grease pencil fill. There should also be a grease pencil draw in the same section that should be on Alt Shift and left mouse button. Change that to be Ctrl Shift left mouse button. This should do the trick now. Flip between the keyframes that you're left to color and close all the gaps. When you're done with that, we can start coloring. Make sure that your fill bucket has the fill material selected that you used before and also has the vertex color mode. In the advanced setting of the fill bucket, select Extend in the Gap Closer section. Now on your first click with the fill bucket, there should be some blue lines showing up, which are sort of like boundary strokes as well, that help you possibly with gaps in your scene. You can extend or shrink them by pressing Alt and moving to the left or to the right. If you're happy with your extend, press a second time and your color will drop into that section. And if there are some small little white gaps here and there, the fill bucket tool selected, press Shift while drawing. This sort of gives you the lasso fill thing that we had before as well. And all these things together now make the fill bucket tool quite a powerful tool to color in your drawing now. To be the most efficient, I suggest you stay with certain sections that have the same color. throughout all your frames first, and then you move over to another color. That will make you a lot faster than if you have to constantly switch colors with the eyedropper tool. You may have noticed this design has a tricky part with this little hole in the ruler. Best way to fill this I found so far is to set up another fill material that works as a negative fill. For that, just create a new fill material and put the fill material on holdout. This way you create negative fill that will erase whatever color was underneath before. Hooray! And then you should have your animation colored. But now your scene is only 24 frames long and you might want to have your walk cycle looping over the extent of 2 minutes or something. So that's gonna be our next step. Just change the length of your scene here for 120 frames. Now you go in the modifier tab and select the time offset modifier here. Make sure that the time offset is on 0 and custom range is from 1 to 24. That's it all. And now your animation should loop for as long as your scene is. But now the walk cycle is only on a step. So the last step is to move it across the scene. It's really quite simple. In object mode, select your walk cycle and move it with G outside of the frame and with S scale to your desired size. Make sure that you're on frame 1 in the timeline. While hovering with your mouse over the drawing area, press I to insert and select Insert Keyframe of the location. Now in the timeline we move all the way to frame 120, press G to move your drawing outside of the screen area on the other side and press I to insert location again. Checking your animation, you might notice that it actually eases in and out of the position, but we want it to go constantly with a constant speed from inside the screen to outside the screen. Now in the timeline there should be 2 new keyframes. Select them and press T. And here you can select your interpolation timeline to be linear. If you check your animation again, you might notice that the feet are actually sliding over the ground. That is because you drew your animation on 3s, but the interpolation is on 1s. So it might make a step and then slide and then make another step and slide for 3 frames. Don't worry, there's a solution to this. Simply select the first and second keyframe, then go under Object, Animation and Bake Action. Select keyframe every 3 frames. This should be the same number as our frame count that we animated on. Once you click that, Blender makes a lot of new in-betweens between 1 and 3. And if you play, you might notice it's still interpolating between each of these keyframes. But you can stop it by selecting all of them and pressing T again and change it from linear to constant. And if you press play now, voila, you have your animation baked on 3 steps, and it should be on the same rhythm that you animated your walk cycle on. Your animation might look a little bit too fast or too slow now, depending on the length of the scene that you have. You might have to experiment on having not 120 but 150 frames or 180 frames for the animation to go from left to outside the screen right. Voila, there you have it, our simple 2D animation walk cycle in Blender Grease Pencil. I hope you could take something away from that, and I'd love to see all the beautiful animations in the future. Speaking of the future, soon I want to create a part 2 of this series where we create a background for this and do some compositing on top of our walk cycle to give it some light and a little bit of atmosphere. But I only will have time for this in November, so please have some patience. If the part 2 is ready, you'll find the link up here and in the comments as well. Until then, happy sketching and bye bye.